It's no secret that the capitalist expectations of productivity is about efficiency, and our efficiency becomes our worthiness. So we, in turn, are constantly up against this fight to do more, do better, and encouraged that the way that looks requires a certain speed that our systems actually aren't aligned to perform in. And so, based on several conversations with many clients and talking with our friends and family, this topic seems to be on the minds of many. So, we thought, what better place to bring it than to the shift? Welcome to The Shift, where we search for ways to do better by thinking better.
Whether you're going through a major life change, looking to deepen your understanding of yourself, or hoping to improve your relationships with others, The Shift is here for you.
We're your hosts, Isla and Yashar, an endlessly curious sister and brother team.
As certified brain-based executive coaches with backgrounds in medicine and management, we combine the neurosciences, performance psychology, strategic planning methodology, and mindfulness techniques to empower your transformation from the inside out.
Join us in conversation as we explore better ways to show up for ourselves and each other. Well, hello, dear friends. Look who's back. We are back for season 2 of The Shift. Did you miss us? We missed you. Hi, Yash. How do you feel being back?
Yes, it's nice to be back, Isla. I enjoyed our hiatus, and now I'm looking forward to carrying out these conversations.
First, I just really want to thank our dear, beautiful listeners. Thank you for stopping us and writing us and telling us how much you enjoyed the podcast last season. Thank you for asking us to come back. We are literally here for you to have this conversation with you and continue exploring ways that we can shift together. So first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining the conversation. So today's topic for season 2, we're going to start off with a conversation about urgency culture. Now, we are clearly in the business, technically, of productivity. So we come across this topic a lot because of the methodologies we use. We're constantly resisting it. And with our clients looking to be more efficient, more productive, perform at their highest, most of the conversations we're having is how to ground them back to their bodies, regulate their nervous systems. And the way to do that most successfully at times is to resist the urgency our society clearly encourages and rewards. It's no secret that the capitalist expectations of productivity is about efficiency, and our efficiency becomes our worthiness. So we, in turn, are constantly up against this fight to do more, do better, and encouraged that the way that looks requires a certain speed that our systems actually aren't aligned to perform in. And so, based on several conversations with many clients and talking with our friends and family, this topic seems to be on the minds of many. So we thought, what better place to bring it than to the shift?
And I think it's turned into a mainstream conversation. It might have been more of a fringe conversation, but recently, at least this year, I've noticed a couple of mainstream media outlets start talking about this more often. Earlier this year, the National Geographic put out an article entitled Urgency Culture Might Lead to Burnout. How can you combat it? Something we'll be talking about today about how can you combat it. And then the New York Times, most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, put out an article, Today's Parents, Exhausted, Burnt Out, and Perpetually Behind. And that feeling of perpetually behind, I think, is a common theme that a lot of us can relate to, and one that we're going to dive deep in today. And what better ways we can align ourselves to tackle the challenges that we have in front of us so we don't end up feeling perpetually behind or exhausted and burnt out. However, I also want to say that I'm a big fan of understanding how to perform and perform well. And sometimes in life, we do have to move fast. And sometimes in life, we do have to be quick in how we make decisions. That is inevitable. The problem becomes when we think that's the only way we have to work. That's the only way we have to show up to life. And so the example I give is if there's an emergency, and you have the doctors or the paramedics rushing onto the scene, the last thing you want to see is a bunch of medically trained professionals freaking out, running in circles, fumbling through their equipment, trying to find what is necessary to assist in what's happening. And that's how I see our lives sometimes. I sometimes see if we are even in an emergency, if we are in a season that we have to perform at a certain speed, what tools do we have within our physiology? What tools do we have within our neurochemistry to be able to attune ourselves to what's needed so that we can show up in a more calm, grounded, and efficient way, and not necessarily in a speed for speed's sake way, which we know is going to burn us out much more quickly. So the more expertise we have in these environments, in these moments, we can rely on multiple other skill sets and multiple other parts of ourselves to show up to the challenge, just like the paramedics do in a situation with emergency status. So that's the conversation I think is really interesting and important to have, because a lot of times people who do move fast in life can get turned off the idea of slowing down, checking in with themselves, taking a deep breath. It's not about sitting under a fruit tree and meditating all day long, though that sounds beautiful. And I encourage anyone who has the time to do that to partake in an activity like that. It's about utilizing our nervous systems and utilizing what's available to us to, again, attune and show up to the challenge the best we can, minimizing the negative psychological and emotional impacts that can occur if we don't.
So there's a lot you said in there that would be really valuable to unpack. But I wanted to tell a story of how this conversation came about within a coaching scenario. So we kind of see practically what it looks like in our lives. And I think the story is actually really relatable to most of us. I feel like most of us have very similar situations, lives set up between family and work obligation, and our own personal needs. And so we have a fantastic client that we are working with, and one of their pain points coming in was this feeling of overwhelm and disconnection. And so what I ask at the start of a session when you're working with me is like, at the end of today's session, how do you want to feel different? And so we know what behaviors or feelings were shifting throughout that hour. And so one of the things that they wanted to feel was less frustrated, less overwhelmed, less annoyed. And typically those are maybe unlikable characteristics we might have, or unlikable feelings, right? Not pleasant. But working with us, we don't think anything is bad or good. The first thing I said is, what if we don't reject that feeling? What if instead we asked it what it needed? Because your frustration, your annoyance, your overwhelm is actually signaling to your body that something is wrong. So instead of trying to override it with a tool or something to get rid of it, instead, I actually wanted to invite it in and ask it what it needed. So then we could actually understand the root. Why was this happening? And so clearly, when we were sitting down with their emotions, their overwhelm, their frustration, their sense of panic, their disconnection, it came down to the simple fact that they live a fast-paced life. There's a lot of noise incoming from multiple people between their family and their job and just society as a whole, and they're deeply seeking quiet. Now, most of us resonate with this feeling, especially if we have children. We know that sensation where we're like, can everyone just be quiet for a second so I can think? And so that's actually at the core of this conversation about urgency, is the so much noise requiring so much of our attention, and us finding the tools and the spaces in which we can resist that urgency and ask it what it actually needs, if it's actually required, and if there's an alternate route. So with this particular client and this particular story, the way we addressed it is notice that the transitions of the day were the most high tension points. So between waking up in the morning, between going from home to work, from work to home, and then transitioning to bedtime. Those were the main transitions that required a deeper investigation of how we can build in space. And so that's again when I ask, when we resist urgency, is I'm asking is how can we build space? Just a little pause between one thing and the other to give ourselves some breathing room. And so we worked through her day and found ways in which she can just create that gap, resist that urgency, rethink what efficiency looks like by adding pause and rest in the day that will have to also happen. There's a lot of things in our lives that quote unquote have to happen, like making dinner for our child, for example. So if that's not something we can delegate, it's probably a task that has to happen in our day. So the question is not removing that task, it's just building in some space before that task that fills your cup, recalibrates your nervous system to be able to handle something that generally will overwhelm you.
It's interesting to me as I listen to that story, the themes or the threads that run through what you said about this individual and how it relates to some of the scientific literature around this topic matter. One of the major challenges with being in urgency, especially being in constant urgency, is that state temporarily reduces our capacity to handle conflict, emotional conflict, and cognitive conflict. So when we are challenged and we are in an urgency state, we do a horrible job most often, especially if it's chronic, to be able to rise to the occasion, understand how to handle the situation to the best of our ability. And in fact, our behavior shifts away from our goals. We may know our goal is to show up in a certain way, but because we're overstimulated and we're in this urgency cycle, our behavior starts to look more dislike our internal goals, not
Mhm.
more like our internal goals. So I can hear that through the story that you were sharing. And the idea where this individual says, I just need some quiet. It reminds me of the conversation we had in season 1, episode 21, entitled, How Do You Optimize Your Creativity? Because to be creative, to come up with solutions, one of the hallmark ingredients is quiet. We need space. And again, something we'll probably talk a lot about in this episode. The other theme that runs in my mind as I hear you tell the story is the idea that when we're overwhelmed in this urgency culture, when our brains are forced to multitask and bounce around without having that groundedness, that pause, that understanding, that cohesiveness, hopefully, that we want to feel, is that we start to go into what's called the reptilian brain. And I'm sure many people have heard of it, but it's that fight or flight state. We go into what scientists call the primary organizing principle of the brain. And that's the state of fear, the state of asking, am I safe? And when we don't feel safe emotionally, physically, spiritually, then again, we tend to move into conflict or shutdown, which neither nor is going to breed connection with ourselves or with others. And we speak a lot about this, again, referencing an older episode in season 1, episode 26. We talk about can you decode your emotions? So that's a really important conversation we had last season, to be able to work through the various emotions that come up throughout our day, throughout our challenges, and how we can work through them to be regrounded and reconnected to ourselves. But what's interesting about that whole conversation, and what I see the theme running through what you're just sharing right now, Ayla, is each individual in that state of conflict or that state of urgency or that state of disconnect has to ask themselves the question, do I have enough resources, time, money, friends, influence, understanding, or desire for what's happening? Or am I enough? Am I pretty enough, smart enough, strong enough, physically, psychologically, spiritually, to handle what's going on? And when our internal dialogue answers, no, I don't have enough resources, or no, I'm not enough to handle this, then we're perpetually going deeper and deeper into these fear states. And we start to tunnel deeper into these emotional and physiological patternings, so that we have a harder time breaking out of the urgency cycle. And in fact, we get tricked into thinking the more urgent and the more quick we work through this, the better the outcome. But it's like digging a hole, and we're constantly digging deeper and deeper and faster, hoping to get out of the hole. It's not going to work. Again, psychologically, physiologically, spiritually, this cannot be sustained, and it will not give us the results we're hoping for. So though the details might differ in the story you shared, and my life or your life or a listener's life, the pattern is quite similar, if not almost exact, in the sense that if we're not careful, we find ourselves in these positions where we're not able to show up to the challenge because we're tricking ourselves and thinking the faster I get through it, the better it will be. And in fact, it's often the more you slow down, the more you connect, the more you understand and feel what is going through you, and connect to how you want to move through the situation, the better you'll be able to do that. And I think one major ingredient that you identified with this client was space and time.
Yeah, and I think another theme that I really want to address for everyone is to validate your feelings, in the sense that they're always communicating with you something that you need. Even when they're inconvenient, they have critical information. Especially when we are talking a lot about brain science, we're talking about demands of society, whether you're looking at it from a neurotypical or neurodivergent lens, like what your needs are valid. And so your knowing is always going to have the answer. So if your body is resisting a thing, looking for an alternative approach will always be the most ideal way to go at it. Just because someone else has said, do it this way, this works for me, means nothing in the way that it works for you. Just because it looks a certain way for somebody, just because somebody processes that information in a certain way, none of that has to do with how you process it, what you're going to need, and the tools that are going to optimize your mental health and performance. And so I think what I want to say is, first and foremost, the moment your body is signaling you something, whatever it is, the first thing I want to do is listen and ask it what it needs.
This point is so important and so easily glossed over. It's the bedrock in how we do our work. And so I know you and I hold this very true. No matter who you're looking at and how they view the world, I truly fundamentally believe, and again, the science will back it up, that for that individual to find the answer for themselves in that moment of challenge, there needs to be a moment of recognition that you have the answer within you. And it often comes by not running away from the problem or the pain or the quote unquote bad thing that you hold within your own landscape, within your own mind, within your own physiology. And to be able to bring oneself to have the courage to have the conversation with what hurts, what's hard, or what's challenging, and to listen to it and ask it what it needs, as you suggested, I believe is the gateway to consciousness, to awareness, to a level of connection, to be able to not only intellectually understand what's going on, but emotionally start to transform how you're processing that challenge, how you're processing that pain. And so there are principles, of course, of how the brain operates. But at the end of the day, none of us, I don't think, no matter how we see ourselves or the world around us or how we're biologically even different in some ways, can escape the reality of what you just mentioned. And that's why I want to highlight it, is that we need to be able to pause and have a conversation and ask, what do I need? Or what does this challenge need? Or what does the pain need within me? And to answer it from a place where we're not trying to just conquer ourselves, but we're trying to, dare I even say, befriend ourselves so that then we can improve how we relate to that pain and work through it. And as one person said a while ago in a book I was reading, that when the pain enters us and is held within us, then naturally it will hurt for the pain to leave as well. And the pain itself is not necessarily the problem. It's the inability or unwillingness to face that pain or that challenge that keeps us stuck. And so a lot of this work requires us to do it differently and to slow down and to make a stance against the culture that says, beat your chest and get through it, or just keep going and you'll rest when you're dead, or, sleep is for the weak, or all of that kind of stuff.
Seems to be a lot of
There seems to be a lot of words to describe, a lot of themes and ideas to describe this type of culture.
and our resistance is to say no. We will
Yeah,
not do that. We will
and
not
again,
do that.
and there may be seasons, and that's what I said off the top of this conversation. There may be seasons, and I'm all for performing and to be fast and excited and move, but it's not sustainable. It's not an everyday thing. And if we are suffering, if we are unable to connect deeply to ourselves and the people around us, then what you said, Isla, there has to be a question asked. What do I need and what am I not receiving?
In the world where, everything is Googleable and there's, checklists of things to do and how to do it, and people constantly telling us what to do, when you come to us, the first thing we're going to do is not do that. And our approach has always been to empower you with your own set of tools and knowledge that you already have. And I was asked the other day in a questionnaire about best practices for supporting a community, like how best to support this community that they were asking me about. And the first thing I said is, you ask. In all ways, in all approaches, you ask. If I'm here to support you, I ask you, how do I support you? I give you your agency back. That's how I build capacity, by allowing you, giving you space and time to articulate your needs, communicate them, and allow me to support you in that way. But in that same vein, you do that for yourself. So when my body is telling me something, I don't tell it to do another thing. I ask it what it needs.
So at this point, let's offer some support to work through the gravitational pull that is the urgency culture. What kind of practices do you find yourself doing to help you when you're feeling that you're being pulled into the urgency, or when you find yourself kind of disconnected from where you want to be?
So first and foremost, like actually what we just said is I question it. Is this actually urgent? Is there a limb bleeding out that requires urgent attention, or can we take some space? So I think number one is clarifying, is this urgent? And what is actually urgent and what is not? Number two is setting expectations based on that information. If it isn't urgent in that capacity that I have to answer immediately, I set a realistic expectation about it. So that might look like, I received your message. I'll get back to you within the week. So there's an acknowledgement and expectations are set for the exchange. So that helps me build a little space in the demand of responsiveness. So those are probably my first two tools. Question the urgency, grade it. What is the actual level of urgency? And then set realistic expectations based on that.
It sounds like creating better boundaries within yourself and with others. And it needs to be said that some people work in environments that they're not afforded time. They, whether that's the culture that's set in that certain business, and or if they are working with actual emergencies, time may be of essence and they have to do things at a certain rate. And so creating that boundaries outside of those spaces, it becomes even more paramount, so that you can, again, balance out the nervous system and reconnect to be able to have this ebb and flow that we are designed to do, to move fast and to move slow. One of the things that I often encourage myself and others to do whenever possible is just really focus on single tasks. Even if it means setting a timer for 10 minutes and saying, for 10 minutes, I'm just going to do this thing. Training our brains to focus and deeply focus on one thing can be very difficult, especially if we have bings and dings and alarms set asking us to do so many other things. And if we're really honest with ourselves, the things that matter the most, we turn off the distractions. And so we have to ask ourselves, how much of our time do we actually spend in that turned off, no one can get to me, I need to do this work? And how much of our time do we spend, half in, half out? Whether, again, it's at the dinner table with your family and everyone's on a device, or it's at work, running around putting out fires. We just have to maybe take an inventory of how much of my time am I single task oriented? How much of my time do I allow myself just to be present? And not just for work, but also for myself, if you're finding some rest and relaxation and restoration.
Yeah. Kind of an expanded view for me of how I guess I do that is I have blocked times and actively create space again with those block times. So for me to be able to focus, I need to know that the other things will get done some other time. So blocking time, knowing that this is my writing time, this is my mind shift time, this is my parenting time, allows me to do the focused activity because I know I've blocked my day, my week in these chunks. And the other thing is I create a lot of buffer time. I don't like to be rushed. It definitely builds anxiety in me, that rushed feeling. So I build a lot of buffer time for the high rush paced activities, for example, school drop-offs and pickups, things that I know are highly active transition periods that require a lot from me. I ensure as much as possible to create buffers before and after them so that I can regulate my nervous system to prepare for those. So kind of part of the same focused activity is the same thing, is like these chunks of time and also creating buffers in between to allow for grace.
Beautiful. That's a concept that's very accessible to a lot of people if it just requires paying attention. It's like this idea of thresholds. Anytime you're moving from in the car to in the house, or from one room in the office to another room in the office, or going from one task to another, how do we build that space, that threshold, awareness, so we're able to enter the next thing in a state that we're hoping to enter, not just blindly and mindlessly running between things and between tasks.
I was going to say, yeah, remember we would set that intentional time before meetings, before our pre-virtual world, where we'd be in the car, and for 1 minute we would do breath work. 1 minute. That's all it was, really. We would do breath work before we would go into a meeting. It was just that focus, intentional moment to center, remind ourselves what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to shift into the next space.
And that's the next best segue that I was going to say as a support tool that I think everyone should be using is breath work. It's free, it's accessible. It's not as complicated as we sometimes seem to make it, but it's really allowing yourself, your nervous system, your mind, again, your consciousness, which is your awareness, to return somewhat to baseline, if not all the way there, at least further away from that urgency culture, away from that idea that you are perpetually behind, and, for lack of a better word, to ground yourself.
So then on that note, friends, again, welcome back. Thank you for being here for season 2. Thank you for being part of our community. We are so grateful that you're here. I want to take Yashar's last point about breath work and end our episode with just 3 simple breaths we'll take together to end. We do this at the start of all our sessions when we work together, just to show how accessible this can be. This doesn't have to be a deep meditation. All it takes is just simple moments to make the moment intentional. So as we close today's episode, let's do that together. I invite you to close your eyes if that's accessible to you. I invite you to take a deep breath in and out. In and out. And last breath in and out. I hope you find space in your day to resist urgency, to recalibrate, and invite in rest. I hope you are able to show up as the version of you that makes you proud, makes you feel safe, and is able to create the day and the life you want. Until next time, dear friends. Thank you for listening, friends. What shifted for you during this episode? We'd love to hear your insights. Write us with any questions, commentary, or episode ideas at theshift@mindshiftleadership.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we would deeply appreciate a like and subscribe.
The Shift is brought to you by Mindshift Leadership, a heart-centered, evidence-based, mindset-powered leadership company, empowering you with the training to prioritize mental health, inclusion, and performance optimization.